Have you ever loved someone so deeply that even after everything was over, your heart refused to let go? You wake up with emptiness, fall asleep with their name echoing in your mind, and no matter how much time passes, it's like your love never got the message. It's time to move on. But what if I told you, the pain you feel isn't a weakness, it's a wound your soul hasn't learned how to heal yet? And what if ancient Tibetan wisdom could finally set you free? There is a quiet pain no one sees, a sadness hidden behind polite smiles and automatic I'm fines. You see them move on, laughing again, living again, while you're still stuck in the memories, still holding on to what could have been. You wonder, why can't I let go of someone who's already let go of me? Then the guilt creeps in. You start believing that loving too much is a flaw, that your heart is broken because you're not strong enough. But what if this attachment isn't about weakness at all? What if it's a sign that a part of you needs healing, not forgetting? For centuries in the sacred monasteries of Tibet, monks have taught the path to emotional freedom. They knew the greatest prison isn't made of stone, it's made of attachment. The belief that we can only be whole when someone else loves us the way we imagined. But there is a way out. A path, a timeless, ancient path. And it begins with one question. Are you ready to let go of what was never meant to stay? Today, you'll hear the story of a young disciple, a soul just like yours, who loved deeply and didn't know how to move on, and what he learned from a silent Tibetan master might be exactly what your heart needs to hear. Once, high in the Ye, sacred mountains of Tibet, a young disciple climbed alone, carrying only a worn robe, tired eyes, and a pain that refused to fade. He reached the monastery at sunrise, and kneeling before the master with tears in his eyes, he asked, "How do I forget someone I still love with all my heart?" The master said nothing, only looked at him with eyes that had weathered many storms of the soul. Without a word, the old man took a clay teapot and began to pour tea into a small cup between them. The tea rose slowly, calmly, its scent soft, almost healing. But the master didn't stop. The cup overflowed. The tea spilled over, soaking the young man's robe. "Master!" the disciple cried. "The cup is full." The old monk smiled gently. "So is your heart," he said. "You wish to fill it with peace, but you still cling to what's already overflowing with attachment." The disciple fell silent. For the first time, he understood. The pain wasn't in the love itself, but in how tightly he held on to it. Then, "How do I empty this cup?" he asked softly. The master stood, lifted the cup with care and turned it over, letting all the tea spill to the earth. "First you must let go," he said. "You cannot pour light into a space you refuse to clear." The disciple's heart tightened. He wasn't ready to let go. He still loved, still hoped, still dreamed. "But Master, what if I never find love like this again?" The old man smiled with deep compassion. "You believe love's value comes from another," he said. "But true love is born in you, and real love never holds you captive." The disciple lowered his head. He was confused, but something within him had started to shift. The master then stepped closer and gently placed his hand over the young man's heart. "The pain you feel," he said softly, "is not from love. It is from attachment to an image you created. It wasn't the person who wounded you, it was the hope for a future that never existed." Those words thundered through the silence inside the disciple. Tears welled in his eyes, but this time not from longing. For the first time he cried because he realized he was trapped in an illusion of what could have been. The master pointed to a solitary tree growing on the mountainside. That tree only grew tall because the wind carried away its old leaves. What you call a loss may simply be life making space for something greater to bloom. The disciple gazed at the tree for several long moments. He felt the breeze brush his face, like a whisper from nature itself saying, "Let go." In that stillness, he finally understood. Letting go of love doesn't mean forgetting. It means transforming. And to transform, takes courage. To love, the Master said, is not to possess. True love is the wish for the other to be free, even if that freedom leads them away from us. The words struck the disciple like the cold wind of the mountain, sharp but awakening. He felt both sadness and relief, as if someone had finally spoken the truth he had hidden from himself. "But why does it hurt so much, Master?" asked, eyes still filled with tears. "Because," the old sage replied, "you still confuse love with need. True love is light, but need is a burden you carry alone." He explained that attachment is the root of suffering. As long as the young man held on to the story of how it should have been, he would never accept life as it truly is. "You're not hurting because of what happened," the Master said, gently. "You're hurting because you're resisting what happened." The disciple closed his eyes. It made sense now. For the first time, he saw that his pain wasn't for the person, but for the story he had written with her, a story that had never truly existed. The heart must be emptied of expectation, so it can be filled with wisdom. From that day on, the Master began teaching him daily practices for detachment. Every morning at sunrise, the disciple would sit in stillness before the vast emptiness of the mountains. There, in silence, he began observing his thoughts. "Don't fight them," the Master would say. "Just observe. Thoughts are like clouds, they come and go. You only suffer when you try to hold on." He also taught the disciple to walk barefoot on the earth, feeling each step as a sacred return to the present moment. Pain lives in the past, anxiety in the future, but peace only lives in the now. With time, the disciple stopped resisting his pain. He learned to embrace it, not as something to be erased, but as part of his healing. "It's not about erasing feelings," the Master said, "but transforming what once was a wound into your greatest strength." Each sunset, the disciple would write his reflections on a small parchment scroll. It was as if, with every word, he was releasing a little more of the weight inside. The Master would smile, watching his student grow. "A mind that clings," he whispered, "is a cage, but a heart that learns to let go becomes the sky." And so, little by little, the disciple came to understand what the Master truly meant. Letting go is not forgetting, it is remembering, without pain. And in that sacred Tibetan silence, the young man finally began to awaken, not to a love that binds, but to one that sets him free. After weeks immersed in the Master's teachings, the young disciple began to feel something he hadn't felt in a long time: lightness. It wasn't euphoric joy, it was a quiet peace, like the inner noise had begun to fade. Before, every corner of the monastery reminded him of pain. Now, those same places felt holy. The garden where he meditated had become his sanctuary. The flowers he once ignored now offered him quiet comfort. He realized the world hadn't changed. He had, one morning, during his daily walk, he saw a butterfly emerging from its cocoon. He stopped, mesmerized, and in that fragile moment of transformation, he saw himself breaking free, slowly, gently, from the shell of a love that once held him, and now set him free. The Master approached gently and said, "You too are shedding your old form, but don't rush. Every transformation requires silence and patience." The young man smiled faintly, but a lingering doubt still followed him. "What if one day I meet that person again?" he asked. "What if love returns?" The Master placed a hand on his shoulder and replied with calm clarity, "If love returns, and it is true, It will never ask you to sacrifice your peace. And if it is not true, then it's not love, it's attachment wearing a mask. Those words echoed in his heart for days, like a bell ringing softly in a quiet valley. The disciple came to realize that emotional freedom doesn't mean rejecting love. It means welcoming it without becoming dependent on it. One morning, the master led him to a small, quiet lake and asked him to toss a stone into the water. "What do you see?" the master asked. "I see ripples forming," the young man replied. "The heart is like this lake," the master said. "Every emotion creates waves. But watch closely. With time, all returns to stillness." It was then that the disciple understood. His pain was not permanent. It simply needed time and acceptance. As the days passed, something beautiful happened. He began to feel grateful for the pain he had endured. Yes, grateful. Because it was that very pain that brought him to the monastery, that led him to the master, and that ignited his journey of healing. He understood that pain was the invitation, but transformation was the answer. One starry night, the young man wept. But it was no longer a cry of suffering. It was a cry of release. He no longer felt the weight of that person on his heart. Now he remembered them with tenderness, but without dependency. There were no more questions, just acceptance. From afar, the master watched and smiled to himself. When a disciple understands that love is not a cage, he thought, then he is finally ready to truly love. The young man, once broken, began helping others who arrived with the same silent ache he once carried. He shared the teachings he had received, not as a preacher, but as someone who had walked that same dark road. He no longer saw himself as a victim, but as someone who had been reborn. And soon his transformation began to inspire. The disciple who once came in tears now walked with steady feet, a light heart, and a peaceful mind. Eventually, the time came for him to leave the monastery. Not because he was running from the peace he had found, but because he felt ready to carry that peace out into the world. And he turned to leave. He saw the old master watching him in silence. They exchanged a smile. It wasn't goodbye. It was a beginning. On the path back to his village, the wind felt gentler, the sky more blue, and even the stones beneath his feet told a new story. He was no longer the young man crushed by an unreturned love. He now carried something far more precious than romance. He carried wisdom, and perhaps without even realizing it, that had been the love he was looking for all along. The love for himself. When he arrived at the village, people were surprised. Some said he looked older. Others said he looked lighter. But no one could quite explain the new energy in his eyes. He lived simply, helping others, listening without judgment, offering gentle words like someone handing out flowers. He no longer spoke of the past with sadness, but like someone who had finally understood the ending of an old story. And when, from time to time, the memory of that person returned, he just smiled. It was like watching a passing cloud. Beautiful, yes, but no longer carrying any rain. In time, he became a new kind of master, not the kind who teaches with authority, but the one who inspires through presence. He didn't tell people what to do. He simply showed them what he had done, with his own pain, and that was more powerful than any advice. One evening, a young woman sat crying by the river. He approached, sat beside her, and said nothing. He just stayed there, present, silent, understanding. And when she looked up at him, with tearful eyes, he simply said, You will get through this, I've been there too. That became his mission, not to heal others, but to show them that healing or is possible, and that sometimes it begins in the most unexpected places, in silence, in acceptance, and in letting go. Maybe you, who are listening right now, are going through something similar. Maybe you're trying to forget someone or free yourself from a pain that just won't leave. But what if I told you that the same strength that transformed that young disciple lives inside of you too? You don't have to run from the pain. You just need to listen to it. Because every pain has something to teach. And once we learn, it lets go. Just like the overflowing cup, maybe now it's your time to empty your heart and finally let peace in.